Alright, what's going on, guys? Hope everyone is staying healthy and safe. Today we have the exclusive Spyderco Teal Endura. I'm going to be reviewing this guy for you. Let's get to it. Alright, so this is kind of an exclusive run of the classic Spyderco Endura. It's by no means a sprint run. I mean, they're still widely available. It came out probably a few months ago. But anyways, they did it with this really nice teal FRN handle. And we got an upgrade on the steel here. See if it'll focus. Yep, so we got S30V as opposed to the classic VG10, which is great. And we'll talk about that in a little bit. So basically what I'm going to do today is I'm going to do a quick size comparison so you can get a feel for the size of this knife, and then I'm going to talk about some good points, some neutral points, and then a few of the negatives and drawbacks that I found carrying this knife. Alright, so first things first, get a little size comparison. I don't have a Delica on hand at the moment, but I do have the Salt 2, which is the same exact size as the Delica 4, so we're going to roll with it. You can see the Endura is quite a bit, bigger size. It's by no means a small knife, right? So it's a full, look at how well that fits my hand. I mean, it's got extra on both ends there. So it's definitely not a small knife. Next up, I'll bring in the Benchmade 940, kind of a staple for EDC here. And you can see the Endura's got a little bit of length on the handle and on the blade there, just barely. Next up, another pretty classic EDC blade that I reviewed earlier, the Kershaw Dividend, again, considerably smaller. And lastly, I'll bring in this big honker here, the Benchmade Bedlam. So you can see, obviously the Bedlam is a massive guy here. I think we got a 3.95 inch blade. So it's definitely bigger, but you can see it's not bigger by any real appreciable amount. So the Endura is by no stretch a small blade. We got a good size. Alright, so let's hop on to some good opinions here. So there's no doubt what first drew me to this knife, besides the fact that they upgraded the steel, is the aesthetics. I mean, come on, look at this color, and they got the matching satin look on all the hardware with the blade. I mean, to me, this is one of the big goods about this knife. And you may not be super huge into the teal, and I get that, it might not be for everybody, but for me personally, this is a really unique color, and combined with that beautiful satin look, that matching satin look with all the hardware and the blade, it was just irresistible. And so that's really one of the first big goods for me on this knife, is it just looks great. It's really nothing like any of the other knives I have in my collection because of this color. So I'm really a fan of that. Secondly, so we've got a full flat grind on this blade, and it's a relatively thin blade stock, 0.13, so not super thin, not as thin as, like, say, the Dividend, I think is 0.09 or something crazy, but still with that full flat grind, and it came out of the box really sharp. Yeah, it's a really nice slicey blade, and I'm gonna do a little cutting demo towards the end of this video, and you'll see. But it just glides through boxes, anything you really throw at it. So that's another big good, is this blade. Really slicey, like the flat grind quite a bit. Plus the steel, the VG10 is decent, right? It's gonna work for you, but the S30V is just it's just such a really good, well-rounded, more premium steel. And so, given that I don't have to sharpen it as much, it's a little bit harder, it's going to be more resistant to chips and cracks, and it's going to be more rust resistant. And being here in Southern California, where it's usually good, humid, sea breezy air, it's not a bad thing to have a little extra chromium in there to, fight off the rust a little bit. So, love the blade on this. Definitely a good. And thirdly, on the good side, we've got just really comfortable to hold. Now, to me, when it first came, I thought it was a little bit strange because you've got this kind of awkward, so like I could hold it here and my two fingers go in this groove here, or you could hold it down here and you go right in between. But to me, that leaves too much handle here, so I kind of hold it right in between. And at first I was a little skeptical, but to be honest, in using it and holding it, it's really not a problem. And this This handle is so grippy. This FRN is just amazing. We've got nice jimping on the handle, and we have some nice jimping on the blade. So you've got a really good thumb ramp here, and you can really just bear down on it. And so yeah, I just love how comfortable that is. Maybe not quite as comfortable as, say, the Salt or the Delica, because it's a little smaller and it cups your hand really nicely. But for how big this knife is, I find it really comfortable. It's not going to rotate or twist or anything. It fits in my hand, and I have, you know, fairly medium to small hands. So if you had even bigger hands, it would probably be even better. But yeah, so those are the goods on this knife. The overall color, the aesthetic, it's beautiful. The blade's great, S30V steel with that flat grind, really slicey, and it's nice and grippy. The ergos are great. So let's get on to some neutral points here. Hey bud, this guy's been helping me with my knife reviews. Loyal, emotional support. Hey buddy. Alright, so now we're going to get into some points that, depending on where you live and who you are and what exactly you prefer, could either be fine or kind of a problem. So these are the neutral points. Firstly, you know, it's a big knife. It's definitely not a small or even medium. I would classify this as a big knife. 3 3/4 inch blade, 5 inch handle, 8 3/4 inch total length. You know, it's definitely big, and depending on where you live, in some places you have these more restrictive knife laws. This is going to exceed some of your blade length limits. So again, it depends on where you live. And another, you know, kind of good thing to that is that it's not not a very threatening looking design. I mean, compared to something like this guy, which is a little bit more tactical looking, your Endura is fairly friendly, and this this teal color certainly helps. But it's not a threatening knife, but it is still really large. And so also, depending on just what you like, some tasks you don't need this big of a blade. In fact, I would venture to say even most EDC kind of type things, you really don't expressly need 3 3/4 inches. But it's good sometimes. And honestly, this has gotten me to like slightly bigger knives more. Because it is really comfortable and it fits fine in my pocket. You know, it's really not super obtrusive. It's relatively light. I think it's 3.67 ounces. But yeah, it's just something to keep in mind. It's definitely a bigger knife, and for some people that's going to be a deal breaker. For some people, it's not going to be a big deal, myself included. So next up, with my sort of neutral points here, is this non-deep carry clip. So you can see one of these squares is 1 inch. So you can see that there's probably, you know, close to 1 inch sticking out of your pocket if you've got this guy in there because of this clip. And again, for some that's not going to be a big issue. And one of the good things about that is you can easily just grab right here and boom, pull it out. No sweat. But then, you know, if you're really not trying to attract attention to it, this isn't going to be a great knife for that, because one, you've got this really bright poppy color, and two, you've got 1 inch of it sticking out of your pocket. So depending on, you know, where you are and what kind of person you are, depending on whether you want it to be completely out of the way or just easy to grab. I have deep carry clips on some of my other most carried knives, so the 940 disappears in my pocket, the Dividend disappears in my pocket. This really hasn't been too much of an issue for me though, and that's why this is a neutral item. But it's something to keep in mind. And you can always get aftermarket clips that are deep carry, but this is just the one that came stock on the knife. And so lastly, on the neutral things is the back lock. It's been fine. It's maybe not quite as smooth as say the Axis lock from Benchmade, or maybe the compression locks and other Spydercos. But it's fine, and you can close it with one hand pretty easily. I have it loosened so it drops there, and just, you know, push it there. One of the things I'm not super into is this really springy closing right there. It just springs it closed because this backlock is always putting pressure on the blade here. So you can see that. But as long as you're careful and your hands aren't in the way, you're not going to get cut, and it's not going to be an issue. But it's just a neutral thing, because some people really might not like this backlock. It could be a deal killer. I'm going to get into some more kind of problems with it here in the negative section, but in general, it's kind of neutral. It's not a huge deal. So basically on the neutrals, it's a large knife, and that may or may not be a problem for some people. We have this clip that's not a very deep carry, but it's not a huge issue. And then the back lock has its, you know, ups and downs. I think it looks okay. It's got a nice little scoop here for your thumb. So now we're going to talk about some more negative things that I found with this knife, and after that we'll get to the cutting demo. Alright, so on to some of the negatives here, and these aren't huge things, but they're just things I've noticed and have come up with over the past few months of carrying this knife. So the one thing is it's pretty hard to flick open, and maybe I'm just bad at it, but compared to the Para 2, or the PM2 or the Para 3, it's just not as easy to flick open, and you can get it sometimes if you really give it a good flick, like there it was, but it's just not as consistent, and that's because the backlock, you have this spring basically putting tension on the blade, and so it's just not conducive to that. Even though I just did it twice in a row, it's not as consistent, and I have found a way around this. You know, what I usually do is I'll open it to about here, and then I can flick it with my wrist. It's easier to do in a non kind of enclosed environment like I have here, and I can get it to close easily with one hand. That's not an issue. But for some people, if you really like that quick, snappy, kind of fidgety action, more similar to this, you know, you could do this all day. It's just not the knife for that, and that's because of this backlock. So that might be an issue for some. You may be able to get around it by just practicing a whole bunch. So it's not a huge thing, but it is, for me, it's a little bit of a negative. Next, you have this closed construction, right? So you see the whole back is closed up. You have a little bit of a cave in there, compared to something like the 940. You've got this open slot where you just free flow of, you know, material, debris, pocket lint, whatever. That's not going to happen with this knife. It's going to get stuck in there, and it's a little bit harder to get out. Again, I found a decent solution for this. What I do is I take this Blue Lube cleanser, and again, you can use any kind of cleanser, not just the Benchmade one. I soak it on one of these makeup Q-tips, and I know that sounds funny, but I like these better than regular Q-tips because they're kind of pressed more, and so you don't have little frizzy fibers going everywhere, and they have a formed like point on one end. So I'll soak the tip here, and then you can just stick it right in and just work it in there, and that cleanser is going to attract all the, you know, dirt and whatever, and it's also going to clean up the metal and protect it and all that. I just recently cleaned this, so there's nothing in there to show you, but basically that works really well. And what you can also do is take a can of compressed air and just spray anything out. So that works well. It's just something that you've got to be a little bit more cognizant of compared to some other open back knives. And then thirdly, similar vein here, it's not a knife that really can easily be disassembled. Again, this backlock kind of complicates things with the spring and getting things to line up. Full disclosure, I've never actually disassembled this knife, nor have I attempted, but I have seen videos and I've heard from the knife community that it's just not something that is necessarily worth doing. And again, I'll probably end up doing it at some point or another because I like to disassemble all my knives, and it's just a good idea. But it's going to take a lot longer than something like a 940 or a more simple kind of regular design non-backlock knife. So that's kind of a problem, and that might be a problem for you if you're constantly working in a dirty environment and getting this knife all gunked up all the time. What I do is I just take my lube and I just drop a couple spots of oil in there and then kind of work the blade around, and that combined with cleaning with the cleanser first is you know, perfect. It works perfectly well. It has worked so far for me. We'll see once I get this knife a little bit dirtier and messier if that works, but so far it hasn't been a huge problem. It's just something to keep in mind. Again, to me that is kind of a drawback for this knife, but in general it's not, none of these things are really any too unforgivable. Again, it's not super easy to flick open because of that backlock. It's got a closed construction, so you have to be a little more cognizant of when you're cleaning and how you're doing that, a little bit more creative, I think. And it's not super easy to disassemble. So if you're someone who likes to disassemble your knives every day, this might not be the knife for you. But all in all, these things aren't hugely terrible things. Alright, so before I get to the cutting demo, which is probably what all you guys really want to see, I'm just going to leave a couple closing remarks here. So there's a few drawbacks, but ultimately I love this knife. It's just been great. I've been carrying it often and using it a lot. I really just can't get enough of that color and the with the satin. To me, it's just perfect. But it's got those few drawbacks and those few neutral points that might, you know, sway you in one direction or another. But I would highly recommend checking this out. And again, there's so many different iterations of the Endura. So if the teal color is not for you, definitely still check this knife out, because there's a whole bunch of color combos, and I'm sure there will be more in the future. So definitely check them out. Again, this is the exclusive Teal Endura with S30V steel. And yeah, let's see how this thing cuts. All right, thanks for watching.